London, 1835. London was frozen in elegance. Candelabras burned brighter than marriages. Music swirled, lace rustled, and the scent of ambition lingered in the air like too much perfume. Lady Louise Ellingham entered the ballroom wearing her best disguise. A smile. Her gown was orange pastel, empire waist, fine lace at the neckline, so delicate it might tear at the first unkind word. Her dark curls framed a face that refused to surrender dignity. Even when dignity was out of fashion, she had been a widow for 2 years. A respectable amount of mourning according to society, which meant they now pitied her loudly instead of silently. Lady Ellingham still attending events. How brave. How desperate. How orange. Louise smiled because one must. She was 35, too old for innocence, too young for invisibility, and tonight she was determined to feel neither. Eliza, her devoted maid, hovered near the entrance, whispering like a guardian angel with opinions. Smile, my lady. Men notice light, not sorrow, Louise whispered back. Then I shall blind them all. Her eyes swept the room. Silk, diamonds, too many feathers. And in the center of it all, Lady Blackwater, society's queen of scandal control, perched like a vulture in pearls. Her fan fluttered, her eyes calculating. Next to her, a thin man with a silver cane murmured names and rumors as if both were currencies. Louise moved to the edge of the dance floor. She felt the weight of stares and whispers cling to her gown like static. Once she had been adored. Once her laughter had turned heads. Now her grief was considered inconvenient. And her presence a reminder that happiness was not guaranteed. Across the room the orchestra paused. A ripple of attention followed the sound of carriage wheels outside. The Duke of Rainsford had arrived. Thomas, the richest man in London. The most insufferably composed. And the very same boy who once taught her how to climb an apple tree without scandal. An achievement that had apparently prepared him for politics. He entered as if the ballroom existed for his convenience. Tailcoat black as sin, cravat immaculate, hair too perfect to be trustworthy, and that same expression of amused superiority that made women swoon and men reconsider their life choices. Whispers erupted. The Duke has returned from Paris. He bought 2 estates. He ruined 1 engagement. He never smiles. He never dances. Louise exhaled. Wonderful. The only man who had ever seen her cry under a willow tree was now the evening's entertainment. He moved through the crowd like a rumor made flesh. Heads turned. Fans fluttered. Lady Blackwater adjusted her pearls as if wealth were contagious. Louise pretended interest in a painting, a pastoral scene of sheep who clearly had fewer problems. But fate, as usual, was fond of drama. Thomas stopped beside her. Lady Ellingham. His tone was smooth, almost kind. But there was humor hiding beneath it. She turned, calm but cautious. Your Grace, I see London has survived your absence. Barely. His mouth curved, just enough to make trouble. He looked at her gown. Orange. Bold choice. I was told widows preferred black. She raised a brow. I was told dukes preferred humility. And yet here we are. A brief silence. Then laughter, his, quiet and genuine. The sound startled her heart more than it should have. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. May I confess something? Louise hesitated. If it's another Parisian scandal, spare me. No, it's worse. I find this ball excruciatingly dull. Would you save me from it? She blinked. Are you asking me to dance? He shrugged slightly. I'm asking you to make everyone else question why I am. Her laugh slipped before she could stop it. It felt foreign, fragile, but it felt alive. He offered his hand, gloved, steady, dangerous. She placed hers over it. The music began again. The orchestra obeyed as if the city itself had been waiting for this waltz. They moved together, hesitant at first. Then perfectly. Whispers swirled faster than the violins. Look at her. The widow. And the Duke. He must pity her. Or desire her, or both. Thomas's gaze held hers. You're enjoying this immensely. You? Terribly. But he didn't let go. His hand pressed lightly against her back. Respectful, possessive, ironic. It was the first time she'd been touched without pity in years. Louise felt her heart rebel against logic. He was everything she shouldn't want. And yet there he was, offering laughter in a world that only offered sympathy. The music ended. They stepped apart. Polite applause filled the silence. Thomas bowed. She curtsied. Their eyes met again, longer this time, a spark quick and unmistakable. Lady Blackwater watched from her corner, fan moving like a blade. Her smile was sharp. The game had begun. Louise turned to leave, but Thomas spoke softly. "Tell me one truth, Lady Ellingham, and I'll trade you one of mine." She paused. Truths were dangerous things at balls. "Very well, you start." He leaned closer. "I never forgot the way you looked at the world, as if it might forgive you someday." Her breath caught. She answered carefully. "And I never forgot that you left before it did." He smiled faintly. "Fair trade." The clock struck midnight. The chandeliers flickered. A cold draft swept the room as if gossip itself had taken a deep breath. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, every pair of eyes followed the widow and the duke. The next waltz started. Louise walked away. Thomas watched her go, his expression unreadable. But his thoughts? They were anything but proper. He had returned to London for business. He had not planned on rediscovering the only woman who ever made him forget he was a duke. As he turned toward the balcony, Lady Blackwater's voice floated through the chatter. "Be careful, Your Grace. Winter may hide beauty, but it never hides consequences." Thomas looked toward the snow and smiled. Then let the season begin. The winter ball had not yet ended, but the thrill had. Champagne had turned to gossip, and gossip to poison. Louise slipped through the side doors toward the garden, searching for air that didn't smell of perfume or judgment. The night was cold enough to quiet even regret. Snow dusted the hedges like sugar. Lanterns flickered along the path, struggling against the wind, much like her composure. She wrapped her shawl tighter, orange silk against white frost. The contrast made her look like a flame that refused to die. Perhaps she was. Inside, laughter echoed, a string of false compliments and painted smiles. She wondered if anyone truly felt joy in London anymore, or if they simply performed it. Eliza would scold her for wandering, but solitude was a safer companion than curiosity. At least solitude didn't ask questions. Footsteps crunched behind her. She turned. Thomas. He stood near the archway, hands in his coat pockets, looking far too at ease for a man followed by 20 roomers. His breath misted in the air like confession. "You left the ballroom early." Her tone was calm, though her heart disagreed. "And you followed me late." He smiled slightly. "I was concerned. The garden is dangerous for reputations." Louise faced him fully. "Then you should not be here, Your Grace." He stopped a few steps away. "No one ever called me by my name anymore." She lifted her brow. "Perhaps they fear what might happen if they do." Thomas. There. The name carried history. He studied her face under the lantern light. "You're colder than you pretend to be. And you," she replied, "are warmer than you want anyone to know." He almost laughed. Almost. But something softer settled instead. The air between them shifted. "You were dancing well," he said. "I was surviving elegantly," she corrected. A gust of wind scattered snow across the path. He took off his gloves and brushed the flakes from her sleeve without asking. The gesture was simple, and ruinous. Louise stepped back. "Careful. You forget what whispers can do." He met her eyes. "Whispers built my fortune, my lady. I stopped fearing them years ago." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to forget how fragile reputations were when one had already lost everything. But the heart was rarely practical. He tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, Louise, do you still collect riddles?" Her surprise showed. "You remember that? Of course. You said the world made more sense when written as a question." He looked toward the frozen fountain, then asked, "What is kept when given away?" Her pulse stumbled. The old riddle. The one they'd whispered as children, hidden behind a hedge in summer. "A promise," she said quietly. He nodded. Still the same answer. Still the same woman. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, full of unspoken things. Thomas looked toward the ballroom windows where light spilled through glass. "They will notice we're gone." She smiled faintly. "Then let them notice. It will give them something to discuss next season." He laughed. The sound broke through her sadness like sunlight. Louise turned to leave first. "If I stay longer, you'll ruin my reputation." He called after her. "You can't ruin what you already rebuilt." She paused at the steps. "And what have I rebuilt exactly?" "Your courage," he said simply. Her chest tightened. It had been so long since anyone had seen her as something more than tragedy. When she met his gaze, something dangerous and beautiful flickered there. From the shadows, another pair of eyes watched. Lady Blackwater stood behind the garden arch, her fan closed like a dagger. A smile curved her lips. London loved a scandal, and she had just found her winter headline. Louise's shawl slipped from her shoulder. Thomas stepped forward to place it back. His fingers brushed the curve of her neck. Warmth, swift and unforgiving. They both froze. The air turned electric. He lowered his voice. "You deserve to feel alive again." She looked up. "And what makes you think I don't?" "Because I know what pretending looks like." The lantern light trembled as if it understood the tension. Louise pulled back gently. "Good night, Your Grace." Thomas's voice followed her as she walked toward the steps. "Good night, my promise." She stopped. Turned slightly. "What did you say?" He only smiled. Then vanished into the corridor of ivy. Back inside, the ballroom glowed as if nothing had happened. But whispers had already begun their journey. The widow and the duke, the garden, the lantern, the rumor. Louise rejoined the crowd, her pulse betraying her calm. Lady Blackwater approached with a smile as polished as silver. "Such a lovely evening, my dear. You must tell me. Did the duke find the air outside to his liking?" Louise met her gaze. "I believe he found it refreshing." Lady Blackwater's fan stilled. Her eyes gleamed. London would feast on this by morning. Louise curtsied, perfectly composed. The orchestra began a new waltz. Thomas had disappeared, but his scent, amber and cedar, lingered faintly on her shawl. She touched the fabric, and for the first time in years she smiled for herself. Not for society. Not for approval. For the promise she hadn't realized still lived inside her. The clock struck 1. Snow fell again. And the gossip began to spread faster than the wind. Morning arrived late in London, draped in fog and rumor. By the time the sun rose above the Thames, half the city already knew that the Duke of Rainsford had been seen walking through the garden with a widow in orange. Servants whispered as they poured tea. Maids gossiped while polishing silver. And in parlors from Mayfair to Kensington, ladies sighed with the satisfaction of moral superiority. Scandal had found a new home. Louise woke with a heaviness she could not name. Her dreams had been full of snow and laughter, the kind that felt real and dangerous. Now reality knocked at her door, carrying a tray of consequences. Eliza entered quietly, holding the morning papers. Her face said everything before her mouth did. "My lady, they wrote about you." Louise sat up. Her heart, polite as always, skipped only once. "Show me." The headline gleamed in black ink. "The Widow and the Duke, a winter waltz that lasted too long." Beneath it, a few poisonous lines. Lady Ellingham, once known for her virtue, was seen leaving the ballroom with His Grace, the Duke of Rainsford. Witnesses describe laughter, intimacy, and impropriety beneath the lantern light. The question remains, what promise was exchanged that night? Louise closed the paper. Her throat felt tight. She managed a calm smile that fooled neither of them. "It seems London has discovered I'm still alive." Eliza frowned. "They're cruel, my lady. You did nothing wrong." Louise rose from the bed. That's never stopped them before. She dressed without a maid's help. Orange again. Defiance wrapped in silk. If the world expected shame, she would give it radiance instead. Outside, the city was already awake with chatter. Carriages rolled through the streets like gossip on wheels. Flowers wilted in window boxes under the weight of winter. By noon, an invitation arrived. Gold seal, elegant script. Lady Blackwater requested her presence for tea. A social ambush disguised as civility. Eliza hesitated. "Will you go? Of course. Predators grow bold when prey hides." Lady Blackwater's townhouse gleamed like deceit in daylight. Louise was ushered into a salon of roses and whispers. Lady Blackwater sat by the fireplace, a picture of polished power. Her smile was exquisite. Her intentions were not. "Lady Ellingham, how radiant you look despite the chill of public opinion." Louise curtsied, graceful even under fire. "Your concern warms me, my lady." Lady Blackwater gestured to the tea table. "Join me." "You must be exhausted from all this excitement." Louise sat, spine straight, smile sharper. "I assure you I'm used to surviving excitement." Lady Blackwater poured tea with the precision of someone who enjoyed control. "Rumor has it the Duke has been quite attentive. London believes you are to be engaged." Louise met her gaze. "London believes many things. Few of them are true." Lady Blackwater stirred her tea slowly. "Truth, my dear, is rarely useful. Perception, however, can destroy or elevate. Which will you choose?" Louise leaned forward slightly. "Whichever choice frightens you most." The older woman's smile faltered. For the first time, her mask slipped. "Careful, Lady Ellingham. You play a dangerous game for a woman without allies." Louise set down her cup gently. Then perhaps it's time I find one. Behind them, the door opened. The butler announced calmly, His Grace the Duke of Rainsford. Thomas entered as if he owned the hour. Every inch the Duke, tall, immaculate, and entirely aware of the chaos he inspired. Lady Blackwater rose in surprise. Your Grace, what a coincidence. Not coincidence, invitation. His voice was steady. I asked Lady Ellingham to meet me here. Louise blinked. You did what? He turned toward her, eyes unreadable but intent. If they will talk about us, let them at least be accurate. Lady Blackwater's fan trembled slightly. So it's true then? A courtship? An arrangement? Thomas smiled faintly. An understanding. One that does not require your approval. The silence that followed was deliciously scandalous. Lady Blackwater's lips thinned. You risk much, Your Grace. The ton adores gossip but never forgives impropriety. He looked directly at Louise. I've survived worse than gossip. And she has survived worse than silence. Louise's breath caught. Something inside her chest, long dormant, stirred awake. Lady Blackwater recovered her composure. How romantic. And how temporary. Society loves a love story until it becomes inconvenient. Louise rose. Then we shall try to bore them by lasting longer than expected. Thomas offered his arm. Shall we? She hesitated only a moment before taking it. As they left, Lady Blackwater called out, A word of advice, Your Grace. Promises made in gardens often die in daylight. Thomas turned slightly, his tone calm but edged. Then perhaps we should plant stronger ones. Outside, the winter light was harsh but honest. Louise released a shaky breath. You might have warned me, she said, and missed the look on her face. He smiled. Never. She tried not to smile back. You've ruined my reputation entirely. He looked at her, eyes softening. Good. Now you can build one that belongs to you. They stopped near his carriage. London's chatter echoed faintly behind them. He opened the door and said quietly, You can retreat or you can begin again. Which will it be, Louise? She met his gaze. Her heart answered before her lips did. Begin again. The carriage rolled away through the snow-covered streets. Two silhouettes inside, one marked by loss, the other by guilt. Both touched by the strange mercy of second chances. From a window above, Lady Blackwater watched them leave. Her smile returned, colder this time. Let them dance, she murmured. Winter always ends. Inside the carriage, silence felt almost tender. Thomas looked out the window, then back at her. You never asked why I returned to London. Louise studied him. Because you missed the gossip columns? He chuckled. Because I owed someone a promise. She tilted her head. And did you keep it? His voice lowered. I'm still trying to. Her pulse quickened. Then tell me the riddle again. He smiled faintly. What is kept when given? She whispered. A promise. He nodded. Exactly. And though the city outside drowned in scandal for one brief moment inside that carriage, it felt like redemption. London did not forgive easily. By dawn, every breakfast table buzzed with the same story. The Duke and the widow, the garden, the scandal. Society, so easily bored, had found a new obsession. The morning papers printed sketches of their waltz. A swirl of lace and arrogance captured in ink. Louise Ellingham's name was now more famous than fashionable. Eliza closed the window shutters with force. My lady, they've turned your dignity into entertainment. Louise sighed. Then at least they are entertained by something worth watching. But beneath the humor, her stomach nodded. Each whisper added another weight she could not see but could feel. She had survived pity before. Could she survive fascination? At Rainsford Hall, Thomas faced his own army of critics. Letters piled on his desk, advice, warnings, and subtle threats. His aunt, the Duchess of Norwell, had written the most dramatic of all. My dear Thomas, if you intend to ruin yourself, at least choose someone from a better family. He tossed the letter into the fire. The flames devoured propriety gladly. His steward cleared his throat. Your Grace, the Committee for Trade Investment has withdrawn its invitation. Apparently, your presence would distract their wives. Thomas leaned back, expression unreadable. So be it. He had built empires from scandal before. He could rebuild his reputation if needed. But Louise? Her heart was not designed for war. He summoned his carriage. London had declared battle. He would not let her face it alone. Louise sat by her window, watching sleet fall against the glass. The garden below was gray and lifeless. The lilies she once loved were buried under frost. How fitting. Beauty always suffered first. A knock. Eliza opened the door. "The Duke of Rainsford to see you, my lady." Louise rose slowly. "Tell him I'm not receiving visitors." Eliza hesitated. "He's already in the drawing room." Louise exhaled sharply. Of course he was. Dukes rarely asked permission. She found him standing by the fire, removing his gloves with practiced ease. He looked tired, though pride still framed his posture. His coat carafrain, and something heavier, remorse perhaps. "Your Grace," she said evenly. "You've caused quite the sensation." He met her gaze. "So have you." She ignored the warmth that spread through her chest. "You shouldn't be here." He smiled faintly. "Then why did you look at the door before you said that?" Louise froze. He always noticed too much. Thomas stepped closer. "London wants a story. Let's give them one worth remembering." Her brow arched. "You mean marriage?" "I mean peace. But if marriage grants it, then yes." Louise turned away. Her fingers trembled against the lace of her sleeve. "You would marry a woman whose name is dragged through every parlor in London?" He took another step. "I would marry the only woman who makes this city worth enduring." Silence filled the room, thick with disbelief and longing. Louise faced him slowly. "You think pity looks like love?" He shook his head. "I think courage looks like you." She wanted to speak, but tears betrayed her resolve. For years she had trained herself not to cry in front of anyone. Now one single tear betrayed every rule. Thomas reached out and brushed it away with the back of his hand. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "You deserve a new beginning, Louise. Let me give it to you." Before she could answer, the door burst open. Lady Blackwater stood there, snow clinging to her cloak like vengeance. What a touching scene. London will adore this version of events even more. Louise stiffened. "Lady Blackwater, you are not welcome here." "On the contrary, my dear, I am invited everywhere scandal lives." Thomas's expression hardened. "What do you want?" "Justice, of course, or something that resembles it." She dropped a folded letter onto the table. "Your late husband owed a debt, Lady Ellingham. A substantial one. And conveniently, the creditor has just resurfaced with your name signed beside his." Louise's breath caught. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." Lady Blackwater smiled, thin and poisonous. "And yet the signature looks remarkably authentic." "The court will decide." Thomas took the letter and read quickly. Forgery. He knew it immediately. The seal, however, was genuine. Someone with access to Lord Ellingham's estate had done this carefully. Lady Blackwater adjusted her gloves. A trial could ruin more than reputations. It could destroy legacies. She turned to Louise. "Unless, of course, you agree to retire quietly from London society. Far away. Preferably somewhere silent." Louise's voice was cold. "You mean disappear. Call it what you like, dear. Disgrace rarely needs precision." Thomas stepped forward, his tone iron. "Leave. Now." Lady Blackwater's smile did not falter. "Threats, Your Grace? How unrefined." But she did leave, closing the door with the satisfaction of a woman who believed she had already won. The silence that followed was unbearable. Louise stared at the fire, her mind spinning. How many more ghosts from her past could return to haunt her? Thomas broke the quiet. "I can handle this." "No," she said sharply. "You've already risked enough." He looked at her, eyes steady. "It's not risk if it's purpose." Louise turned away. "I won't let you destroy your name because of me." He stepped closer. "You misunderstand. I'm saving mine because of you." The confession hung between them, fragile and dangerous. She wanted to believe him. But fear spoke louder than love. "Leave, Thomas, please." He hesitated. For the first time, she looked truly frightened. Not of him, but of what he made her feel. He bowed his head slightly. "As you wish." When the door closed, she sank into the nearest chair. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. Eliza entered quietly. "My lady?" Louise looked toward the window. Snow had started again. Each flake fell like a small decision she could not undo. She whispered softly. "Tell me, Eliza, can one survive love twice?" Eliza smiled sadly. "Only if it's real the second time." Louise closed her eyes. She wanted to believe in second chances. She wanted to believe in the Duke. But in London, love was often just another form of scandal. Across the city, Thomas sat in his study, the forged letter before him. He had built fortunes on strategy, not faith. But now he felt something dangerously close to devotion. He would uncover the truth even if it meant tearing apart the world that had raised him. He sealed a note and handed it to his butler. "Send for my solicitor. Tonight." The fire flickered, casting gold over the walls. Outside, the bells of St. Paul's rang through the frozen air. London was still awake, watching. And the game once again had changed. The new year brought no mercy. London was colder, sharper, and louder than ever. Every whisper still began the same way. The widow. The Duke, the garden. Louise had become a legend she never asked to be. And legends in London were never kind. Invitations had stopped arriving. Friends had grown scarce. Even the grocer's wife, who once admired her taste in ribbons, now handed her change with trembling curiosity. Louise bore it all with poise. She had learned long ago that dignity was cheaper than revenge. But dignity didn't warm lonely mornings. Thomas, meanwhile, had vanished from the city's gossip pages. He no longer attended the club, no longer visited the opera. London assumed he was nursing wounded pride. London was wrong. He was hunting the truth. The trail began at his solicitor's office, an old man named Whitby, whose ink-stained fingers had touched every secret in the kingdom. Thomas laid the forged debt upon his desk. Whitby adjusted his spectacles, curious. The signature mimics Lady Ellingham's hand, but the ink composition is wrong. Imported. From Italy. Thomas frowned. And who in London uses Italian ink? Whitby hesitated. Only the finest artists, diplomats, and one Lady Blackwater. Thomas's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much. But proof in London mattered less than timing. He would need both. Louise tried to rebuild her days quietly. She painted, she read, she walked in her small garden whenever the sky allowed. The lilies had not survived the frost, but their memory did. They reminded her of warmth, of promises. A carriage stopped outside her townhouse. Eliza peeked through the curtain. "It's from Rainsford Hall." Louise froze. "He's come back?" Eliza shook her head. "A letter." Louise opened it carefully. The handwriting was strong, familiar, too direct to be polite. "Louise, do not attend the Montclair ball tomorrow. It is not safe. Trust me, T." She read it twice, then a third time. Danger was one thing. Being told what to do was another. The Montclair ball was London's way of pretending winter hadn't dulled its vanity. Silk gowns, candlelight, champagne bubbling with malice. Louise arrived late, wearing a gown of soft orange satin with delicate embroidery of gold lilies. A scandalous choice. The room turned as one. Some gasped. Some smiled. Lady Blackwater almost choked on her champagne. Louise curtsied to no one in particular. If society wanted a show, she would give them art. Whispers began to rise. A widow has no shame. The Duke abandoned her. How tragic. Louise ignored them and glided through the crowd. She danced once, then twice with polite strangers who were too intrigued to resist. But she could feel eyes on her. Predatory. Waiting. At the far end of the ballroom, a man in a gray coat spoke quietly to Lady Blackwater. He handed her a folded note, and her expression shifted from amusement to triumph. Moments later, the host called for attention. "My friends," he said cheerfully, "it seems an anonymous letter has arrived for our amusement. A small scandal to brighten the evening." Laughter rippled through the room. Louise felt her chest tighten. Lady Blackwater nodded from her corner. The host unfolded the note. "To the Duke of Rainsford and his widow-to-be." The words dripped with venom. How noble of him to protect her debts by buying her honor. A true act of charity if charity could wear orange silk. Gasps, a few cruel laughs. Louise's vision blurred, but she did not look away. She stood straighter. If she would burn, she would do it gracefully. Then a voice came from behind the crowd. "That's enough." Thomas stepped forward. He had arrived unannounced, dressed in black velvet and determination. Every head turned. Every whisper died. He took the letter from the host's trembling hand. Read it once, twice, then tore it cleanly in two. His voice was calm, but the air around him shifted with every word. If London insists on creating fiction, at least choose a better author. A ripple of nervous laughter followed. Lady Blackwater's smile cracked. The Duke turned to the crowd. "My affairs are my own. My intentions toward Lady Ellingham are honorable, and anyone who doubts that may address me directly, preferably before breakfast." A hush fell. He looked at Louise. Her eyes were glass and fire all at once. She wanted to disappear and she wanted to run to him. Neither felt safe. He offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" The crowd parted. The orchestra hesitated. Then, sensing history, began to play. Louise took his hand. His palm was warm, steady, real. They moved together, slower than the music, like two people finding rhythm after ruin. When the final note ended, the ballroom erupted, not in applause, but in something quieter. Respect, even envy. Lady Blackwater left before the song ended. Defeat was not a shade that suited her. Louise turned to Thomas as the last violin faded. "You shouldn't have come," he smiled. "And missed the pleasure of rescuing you twice in one lifetime? Impossible." She wanted to be angry. She wanted to laugh. Instead, she whispered, "You'll regret this tomorrow." He leaned closer. "Then I'll look forward to it." Outside, snow fell again, soft and relentless. The carriage waited, warm with promise. Hesitated on the steps. "You told me not to come tonight." He nodded, "And yet I knew you would." She tilted her head. "Because I'm stubborn? Because you're brave." For a moment the city disappeared. There was only the sound of snow and the strange safety of being seen. He reached into his coat and handed her a small box. Inside, a ring of gold lilies. A quiet symbol. A loud confession. Louise looked up. "Thomas." He stopped her with a soft smile. "No answer tonight. Just keep it." She did. And for the first time since her husband's death, she believed in beginnings again. But somewhere across town, in a candlelit room full of ink and malice, Lady Blackwater poured herself a glass of wine. A man stood by the fireplace, his face hidden by shadow. She raised her glass. "To failure, temporary as ever," he replied, voice low. "Then let's make it permanent next time." And the game began again. The morning after the Montclair ball was quiet only in sound. In spirit, London roared. Tea spilled over every parlor table as whispers replaced sugar. The Duke had defended her, in public, before everyone who mattered and everyone who didn't. It was both the most romantic and the most reckless thing anyone had done all season. Louise spent the morning pretending calm. She read. She sewed. She walked in circles across her parlor rug until Eliza finally sighed. "You're wearing a hole in the carpet, my lady. Then at least something in this house will match me." Eliza folded her arms. "You're falling in love." Louise looked up sharply. "Don't be absurd. He's impossible. Arrogant, irresistible." Eliza grinned. "Exactly. At Rainsford Hall, the Duke was not in love. At least, that's what he told himself while staring at her glove on his desk. It had fallen from her hand during the dance. He should have returned it. He hadn't. Thomas turned the glove over, tracing the embroidery of orange thread. He was supposed to be studying ledgers, not longing, but ledgers never smiled the way she did. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His steward entered. "A message for you, Your Grace, delivered by hand, from Lady Blackwater." Thomas opened the note. It was short. "If you value the truth about her husband's death, meet me tonight. Alone. At the opera." He crushed the paper in his fist. Lady Blackwater was not known for truth, but she was known for precision. If she wrote it, she meant it. He looked at the clock. 8 hours until the opera. Plenty of time to prepare for war disguised as conversation. That evening, Louise stood before her mirror. Her hair was pinned high, curls soft at the edges. Her gown, simple but luminous, amber silk trimmed with pearls. Eliza clasped a necklace around her neck. "You're glowing." "I'm anxious." "It's the same thing, my lady." Louise smiled faintly. She wasn't expecting to see Thomas, but she dressed as if she might. The carriage wheels outside startled her. Not his, Lady Amelia Montclair's crest. Her old acquaintance, full of charm and mischief, swept into the parlor moments later. "Darling, you are infamous. How I envy you." Louise laughed softly. "You may take my infamy. I'll keep my sanity." Amelia leaned close. "Do you know he refused 3 dances last night? For you?" Louise's heart tripped. "Nonsense, I was merely convenient scandal." Amelia smirked. "Scandal doesn't make a man's gaze linger that long." At the same hour, the opera house shimmered with chandeliers and false sincerity. Lady Blackwater waited in a private box veiled in black lace like a spider dressed for mourning. Thomas entered without announcement. His expression was calm, his patience not. "You promised truth," he said. She gestured toward the seat beside her. "Then sit." He remained standing. "Talk." She smiled faintly. "Always the Duke, always commanding. You remind me of your father, proud, doomed." Thomas's jaw tightened. "My patience is not infinite, nor is her time." He froze. "Whose time?" Lady Blackwater's eyes glittered. "Your precious widow. You think her husband died of fever? How charmingly naive." Thomas stepped forward. "Explain." She leaned closer. lowering her voice to a whisper sharp enough to cut. He was poisoned, and the note I hold names who paid for it. Thomas's stomach turned cold. Who? Lady Blackwater smiled. That depends on what you're willing to give me. Across town, Louise attended Lady Amelia's supper. Music, laughter, and too much wine softened the edges of fear. But gossip arrived faster than dessert. Lord Avery leaned in. My dear Lady Ellingham, rumor says your husband's death wasn't so natural. Louise's fork stopped midair. What did you say? He shrugged lazily. Oh, forgive me. I assumed you knew. The table went silent. Amelia's smile faltered. Louise set down her glass with trembling hands. Her voice was even, but her heart raced. And who spread such filth? Avery smirked. Ask your Duke. Thomas left the opera burning with anger. Lady Blackwater's laughter followed him out like perfume. He had refused her terms, whatever bribe she expected, and now she would take her revenge another way. He rode through the dark streets, coat whipping in the wind. Each thought was a storm. If she was right, if Louise had lived believing a lie, if her husband had been murdered. He arrived at her house past midnight. Eliza opened the door, startled. Your Grace, she's awake. Louise stood by the fireplace, her face pale, her eyes blazing. You knew. He froze. Knew what about Henry, about his death? About the lies. Thomas's pulse stumbled. Who told you? Does it matter? The silence between them cracked like ice. He stepped closer. Louise, I swear, she cut him off. Don't swear, Thomas. Just tell me, was he murdered? Was it my fault? His voice softened. No, never your fault. But yes, it was an illness. Louise turned away, one hand gripping the mantel. The room swayed. The world she'd rebuilt collapsed quietly inside her chest. He wanted to touch her, to hold her steady, but she flinched when he reached for her. Don't just go. Thomas clenched his fists. You think I came here to hurt you? I think you came to finish what life started. Her words struck deeper than he expected. He stepped back, the distance between them suddenly unbearable. I'll prove the truth, he said finally. For him, for you. Then he left, leaving the scent of rain and regret behind. Louise sank into the chair by the fire. Eliza rushed to her side. My lady, Louise shook her head. No tears tonight. I've drowned enough. At dawn, Thomas met Whitby again. His eyes were bloodshot, his temper thin. Find every document tied to Lord Ellingham's death. Every physician. Every servant. And if one name appears where it shouldn't, bring it to me. Whitby nodded. And the widow? Thomas looked toward the window. His voice was quiet, heavy. She doesn't trust me, not yet. Then win her truth, not her gratitude. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. Win her truth. Yes, even if it cost him everything else. That same morning, Louise opened her window to the gray sky. Snowflakes drifted down, soft and careless. She thought of his eyes, his words, his promise. And the riddle whispered between them under lantern light. What is kept when given? A promise. She whispered the answer again. Not sure if it still felt true. The city wore its winter like pride. Cold, unforgiving, beautiful only from a distance. Louise had stopped attending teas, balls, or gatherings. Silence was safer. It didn't whisper back. Her home had become a sanctuary of unfinished letters and wilting flowers. Each morning she asked Eliza for news of the Duke. Each morning Eliza hesitated before saying, No word yet, my lady. But that morning was different. Eliza entered the room holding an envelope sealed in gold wax. The crest wasn't Rainsford's. It was older, unfamiliar, an intricate lily intertwined with a serpent. Louise frowned. Who would send this? Eliza hesitated. It was delivered before dawn. No messenger waited for reply. Louise broke the seal. Inside lay one sheet of parchment. The handwriting was elegant, precise, cruel. Lady Ellingham, the truth you seek lies not with the Duke, but with your husband's own kin. He sold a secret before he died. Meet me where lilies bloom no more. Tonight. Midnight. There was no signature. Only a pressed lily, dry and colorless. Louise stared at it for a long time. It looked like memory turned to dust. Eliza's voice trembled. You can't go. It could be a trap. Louise nodded. It could. But if I don't, I'll never sleep again. Across town, Thomas sat in his study surrounded by chaos disguised as evidence. Letters, bills, witness statements, all pointing to one name, Lord Harland Ellingham, her late husband's cousin, executor of his estate, and apparently beneficiary of a policy that should have gone to Louise. Thomas slammed the document shut. He had seen greed in men before, but this was betrayal wearing family's face. Whitby looked uneasy. You can't confront him directly, Your Grace. The man has influence. Thomas's eyes darkened. So do I. He rose, grabbed his coat, and left without another word. The meeting place was the old botanical conservatory near St. James, abandoned for years. Once a haven of lilies, now a ruin of glass and ivy. Louise arrived cloaked in gray, Eliza waiting in the carriage nearby. The air was sharp, tasting of iron and rain. Her footsteps echoed against marble tiles cracked with time. She reached the center of the hall where a single lantern burned. Next to it, a figure stood waiting. Tall, elegant, familiar. Lord Harland Ellingham. Cousin, charmer, snake. Louise's stomach turned. Lord Harland. I expected a ghost. He smiled faintly. You might still get one. She stepped closer, voice steady. You wrote to me. He tilted his head. Did I? London's full of letters these days. Patience frayed. Why would you forge my name, destroy my husband's reputation? He laughed softly. Because your husband was weak. And weakness is expensive. He gambled, Louise. He borrowed from the wrong people. I cleaned the mess before it reached your door. Her eyes narrowed. You forged my signature to pay his debts? He shrugged. You should be thanking me. The Duke certainly will once he realizes you're not worth the ruin. Louise's breath caught. You're lying, am I? Ask yourself, why would a man like him risk everything for a widow without fortune? She stepped back, fury trembling in her bones. You know nothing of him. Harland smiled. On the contrary, I know men like him too well. Pride first, pleasure second. Remorse never. He pulled something from his coat. A small vial gleaming even in dim light. He twirled it between his fingers. Your husband drank this, enough to still a heart quietly. No blade, no blood, just silence. Louise froze. Her pulse thundered. She wanted to scream, but the sound died in her throat. Why show me this? Because, my dear, he said smoothly, you're about to join him. A hand seized her wrist from behind. Rough, unfamiliar. The lantern crashed to the floor. Flames licked at old wood. Louise struggled, but the man's grip was iron. Harland's voice echoed through the crackle of fire. It's nothing personal. You were simply inconvenient. A gunshot split the air. Harland stumbled. His expression twisted from triumph to disbelief. He fell. Louise turned. Thomas stood at the shattered doorway, pistol in hand, smoke rising from the barrel. His coat was soaked from rain, his face pale and furious. He crossed the floor in 3 strides, pulling her close. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak. Behind them, Harland groaned. Thomas looked down at him. You poisoned your own blood. You ruined her name. Why? Harland coughed, blood on his lips. Because she loved you first, and I could never make her look at me that way. His body went still. The rain hissed through the broken roof, extinguishing the fire. Thomas pulled Louise tighter. She trembled in his arms. Her tears mixed with rain. He pressed his forehead to hers. It's over, she whispered. Is it? He didn't answer. He just held her as the world around them collapsed in smoke and silence. By dawn, word spread again. Lord Harland Ellingham dead in an accident. The widow rescued once more by the Duke. And London, insatiable, prepared its next headline. Louise sat in her parlor, staring at the burned lily she had found. Its petals were ash now, its beauty gone. Yet it had led her to truth. A painful, saving kind of truth. Thomas entered quietly. You should rest. She looked up. And you? I haven't earned rest yet. He sat beside her. The firelight caught his face, gentle, exhausted, real. You saved me again, she said softly. He shook his head. No, Louise. You saved yourself. I only followed the light you left behind. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, snow fell again. Inside, hearts began to thaw. The morning after Harland's death, London awoke hungover with curiosity. Rumor, that faithful companion of the idle rich, returned with new stories to tell. Some said the Duke had killed for love. Others whispered that the widow had tempted him into sin. And somewhere between truth and envy, a legend was born. Louise didn't leave the house for 3 days. The curtains stayed closed. The letters piled up. Sympathy from strangers, concern from friends, and offers of spiritual guidance from women who had never spoken to her before. Eliza sorted through them, muttering darkly, Half of London pities you. The other half wants to be you. Louise gave a weary smile. Neither half truly knows me. But inside she was unraveling. She had not slept since that night at the conservatory. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Harlan's face. The hatred, the jealousy, the way he said she loved you first. The words haunted her more than the gunshot. Thomas spent those same days locked in his study. He faced a different kind of enemy, his own conscience. The police called it self-defense. The courts accepted his influence. But London society thrived on half-truths. He was the Duke who saved a lady, yes, but also the Duke who killed a man for her. He stared into the fire, jaw tight. He had built a life on control, strategy, and unshakable composure. Now one woman's name had set it all ablaze. His butler entered quietly. "Your Grace, the solicitor has arrived." Whitby bowed as he entered, carrying a folder of documents. "It's done. The estate and remaining titles revert to Lady Ellingham. The forged debts are void. Her name is cleared." Thomas exhaled. For the first time in days, relief. And yet it felt hollow. Freedom meant little if she refused to see him. Whitby hesitated. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but may I speak plainly? Always, you've fought for her reputation. Perhaps it's time you fight for her heart." Thomas's expression softened, if only for a second. He rose, straightened his coat, and said quietly, "Send for the carriage. It's time London saw us together, properly." That evening, the season resumed its glittering charade. The Earl of Pembroke's ball promised elegance, redemption, and, inevitably, fresh scandal. No one expected Louise to appear, which is precisely why she did. She arrived in a gown of pale gold, simple yet defiant, her hair adorned with lilies reborn in white silk. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. She didn't flinch. If the world demanded a spectacle, she would perform with grace. Then the music stopped. Because he had arrived, the Duke of Rainsford entered in black and silver. No mask, no hesitation. Every eye turned to watch the inevitable collision. Louise's pulse raced. He walked straight to her, stopping only a breath away. Whispers fluttered like doves. He bowed slightly. "Lady Ellingham, Your Grace." They stood in silence long enough for the orchestra to forget its place. Then she said softly, "You shouldn't be here." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that. And you keep coming anyway." The corners of her lips curved. "Perhaps I enjoy impossible company. Then dance with me before the impossible turns to gossip again." He offered his hand. She took it. The music returned, slow and shimmering. They moved as if time had stopped to admire them. Two broken reputations finding rhythm in each other's ruin. When the dance ended, the applause was hesitant but real. Louise exhaled. The room had changed. They had changed. Lady Montclair approached, eyes bright with mischief. "Well, this will silence the gossips. Or feed them for a decade." Louise smiled. "At least they'll have good material." Thomas turned to the crowd, voice calm but commanding. "London has spent months talking about us. It's time they hear the truth." A hush fell. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, the deed clearing her name. He placed it in her hands, publicly, deliberately. "This belongs to you, Louise. Everything they took. Everything you lost." Her throat tightened. "Why would you do this here?" "Because they should know what honor looks like." The room erupted in murmurs. Lady Blackwater, somewhere in the back, turned pale as marble. Thomas continued, his tone softer now. "If London insists on judging, let them judge love instead of lies." Louise stared at him. "You're daring them." He smiled. "I'm daring fate." Later that night, on the terrace outside the ballroom, the city lights shimmered against the river. Louise leaned against the balustrade, finally breathing freely. Thomas joined her, standing close enough for warmth. "You've changed everything," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, you changed me." For a long moment they said nothing. The world beyond the terrace hummed with music and envy. Here there was only peace and the faint ache of something too fragile to name. Louise looked up at him. "If I were wise, I'd leave London tomorrow. If I were wise, I'd let you. And yet," he met her gaze, "and yet I'm not wise." Her smile broke through the last of her fear. She reached for his hand. "Then let's be foolish together." Inside, a servant whispered to another, "The Duke and the widow are on the terrace, alone again." And so the next morning London had its story. But for once it was a story worth repeating. The morning after the Pembroke ball, the world felt different. Or maybe it was just London pretending not to blush. Every paper carried their names. The Duke and the widow, the scandal that danced, the promise and gold. Some called it romance, some called it ruin. But every version began with the same undeniable fact. They had faced the world together. Louise sat at her breakfast table, the newspaper trembling slightly in her hand. Her tea had gone cold long ago. Eliza entered with another bundle of letters. More invitations, my lady, or apologies disguised as invitations. Louise smiled faintly. Apparently forgiveness arrives by post now. Eliza hesitated before adding, and this one from the palace. Louise looked up sharply. The palace? The seal was unmistakable, the royal crest pressed deep into wax the color of blood. She broke it open. Lady Ellingham, His Majesty requests your presence this afternoon at St. James's Hall. You and His Grace the Duke of Rainsford will attend together. Matters of decorum must be addressed. Louise swallowed. Decorum. A word that meant punishment when spoken by royalty. Eliza's eyes widened. They can't? Louise interrupted softly. Oh, they can. At Rainsford Hall, Thomas was already reading the same letter. He didn't curse often, but this one earned it. He called for his valet. Prepare my coat and the carriage. We go to war with etiquette. The valet hesitated. War, Your Grace? A polite one, the most dangerous kind. But behind the applause and curiosity afternoon, the sky hung low with gray clouds, as if the heavens themselves were eavesdropping. St. James's glittered with gold and disapproval. The Duke and the widow entered side by side, every head turning like clockwork. At the end of the hall stood Queen Adelaide, serene and sharp, surrounded by courtiers eager to watch blood drawn with a smile. Louise curtsied deeply. Thomas bowed. Your Majesty. The Queen regarded them both. Lady Ellingham, Duke of Rainsford. London has enjoyed your story. Her tone was neither kind nor cruel, just precise. Louise kept her voice steady. We never meant to entertain, Your Majesty. The Queen's eyes softened slightly. And yet you have. She glanced toward the courtiers. They whisper of forbidden affection, scandal, and rebellion. Do you deny it? Thomas met her gaze. No, we deny nothing. Gasps fluttered through the room like startled birds. Louise's heart raced, but she didn't look away from him. If he would burn, she would burn beside him. The Queen studied them both. Courage in a ballroom is rare. Courage before the crown rarer still. Then her voice lowered. You forced London to look at love through smoke and shame. But tell me, Lady Ellingham, do you love him? The hall froze. Even the guards seemed to stop breathing. Louise opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She glanced at Thomas. His eyes held hers, calm and sure. Her voice finally found its way. Yes, I do. A murmur ran through the court. The Queen tilted her head. And you, Duke? Thomas's answer came without hesitation. With every mistake I've ever made. The Queen's lips curved, almost amused. Then I see no further issue. But understand, London will not forgive easily. And scandal fades slower than devotion. Thomas bowed his head. Then let devotion last longer. The Queen nodded once, signaling the end. You may go, and for heaven's sake be discreet, at least until next season. The courtiers buzzed with disbelief as they exited. A royal pardon wrapped in sarcasm, but a pardon nonetheless. Outside the palace, the air tasted of rain and freedom. Louise exhaled shakily. We survived that, barely. Thomas looked at her. You were magnificent. She smiled weakly. My knees disagree. He laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. I think the Queen rather likes you. Louise raised an eyebrow. She nearly exiled me. He shrugged. Flattery takes many forms. They walked slowly toward the carriage. Every few steps their hands brushed, never quite holding, never quite apart. Louise stopped.
What happens now?
He turned to her. Now? We live with what we started. Together if you'll have me. She looked down, then back at him. You mean marriage? He smiled softly. I mean peace. But marriage sounds like the same thing. Louise hesitated. Her heart knew the answer. Her mind needed courage to follow. She reached for his hand. Then peace it is. He kissed her hand, slow and reverent. The rain began to fall, soft as forgiveness. That night, London was divided again. Half whispered that the Duke would marry her. Half swore he never would. And somewhere between lies and longing, two souls finally began to rest. But not everyone slept easy. At a darkened writing desk, Lady Blackwater wrote by candlelight. Her hand moved quickly, her lips curved in satisfaction. If scandal cannot destroy them, she wrote, perhaps legacy will. She sealed the letter with black wax and handed it to a man in uniform. Deliver this to the Times anonymously. The messenger bowed. At once, my lady. The candle flickered, its flame thin and cruel. Lady Blackwater whispered to the dark, "Let's see if love survives daylight." The next morning began with silence. A silence so heavy it made the ticking of the clock feel like judgment. Then came the knock at the door. Persistent. Urgent. Eliza opened it to find a young boy clutching a rolled newspaper. He looked terrified. He should have been. Louise was still at the breakfast table when Eliza whispered, "It's the Times, my lady. You'll want to read it yourself." Louise unfolded the paper slowly. At first she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then her breath caught. Duke's fortune built on deceit, the widow's love paid in blood and gold. Below, a portrait sketch of Thomas. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, defiance inked as villainy. The article claimed that his business empire had been sustained by false contracts signed by her late husband. That the Duke had used their connection to cover his own crimes. That the romance of the century was nothing but an elaborate act of guilt. Louise's teacup shattered against the floor. Eliza rushed forward. "My lady," Louise's voice was thin, almost distant. "Who would write something like this?" Eliza hesitated. "Someone who hates happiness, I suppose." Louise's fingers trembled as she turned the page. Each line was worse than the last. False ledgers. Illegal dealings. A rumor of betrayal so elegant it almost sounded true. And at the bottom in small print the words that chilled her. Information provided by a former confidant of the Duke. She didn't need to guess the name. Lady Blackwater's venom had found ink. At Rainsford Hall, chaos ruled. Servants whispered in corners. Clerks gathered at the gates, reporters among them. Every scandal-hungry journalist in London wanted a statement. Thomas strode through the hall, face carved from steel. His steward followed nervously. "Your Grace, the article, I've read it." Whitby, the solicitor, waited in his study with trembling hands. "We can prove every number false, Your Grace, but by the time truth travels, lies will have built an empire." Thomas poured a glass of whiskey, untouched. "I should have known she wouldn't stop." Whitby hesitated. "You mean Lady Blackwater?" Thomas nodded. "She's behind this. She always wanted control of the Ellingham holdings, and now she's found her weapon." He set the glass down, untouched. "And Louise?" Whitby looked away. "The city already whispers she was his accomplice." Thomas's chest tightened. He felt fury, but deeper still fear. Not for himself, but for her. He grabbed his coat. "Have the carriage ready now." Louise hadn't moved since she read the article. Her thoughts twisted in every direction at once. Thomas had risked everything for her. Could it be true that he'd once risked everything because of her? The door opened sharply. He entered. No announcement. No hesitation. Their eyes met, and the air cracked between them. "You saw it," he said quietly. "Yes, and you believe it?" She wanted to say no. She wanted to believe the man who had saved her, who had risked his life, who had looked at her as if she were the only truth left in London. But doubt was a parasite. Once it entered the heart, it was hard to starve. She rose slowly. "Tell me it's all lies." He met her gaze without flinching. "It's all lies." "Every word." Louise's voice wavered. "Then why does it sound true?" He took a step closer. "Because truth and scandal wear the same perfume in London." She turned away, tears burning. "Do you know what it's like to be destroyed twice by the same world?" Thomas reached for her arm gently. "You won't face this alone. You can't fix this with promises, Thomas." He paused. "Then I'll fix it with proof." Her eyes lifted to his. "And if proof isn't enough, then I'll burn down the lies." That evening, the Duke's carriage pulled up before the Times office on Fleet Street. Reporters crowded the entrance like vultures in ink-stained coats. Thomas stepped out, hat low, temper higher. He demanded the editor. When refused, he simply walked past the clerk and into the man's office himself. The editor, weasel with too much confidence, rose in panic. "Your Grace, this is highly irregular, so is libel." Thomas slammed the newspaper onto the desk. "You printed this without evidence. We have sources. Anonymous ones. Then perhaps you should prepare for anonymous consequences." The editor paled. "Is that a threat?" "A promise." He leaned in, voice low and sharp. "Find whoever gave you that story. If you don't, I will. And I assure you I'll be less polite." He turned and left, leaving the man trembling in his own ink. Back at her townhouse, Louise sat before the fire, eyes fixed on the flames. The city outside murmured her name like a curse in a prayer. Eliza entered quietly. "He'll clear this up, my lady." Louise nodded faintly. "I know. But every time he defends me, he bleeds a little more." Eliza frowned. Then perhaps it's time you defend him. Louise turned. How? The truth is louder when spoken by the wrong person. Louise stared into the fire. Her reflection wavered in the glass. Maybe that's exactly why it's time to speak. By morning, a new headline appeared. The Widow Speaks. Louise had written it herself. Elegant. Direct. Unapologetic. She denied the accusations, praised the Duke's integrity, and ended with words that silenced London's laughter for a single breath. Love does not require permission from those who never felt it. Judge us if you must, but remember scandal fades. Truth remains. Thomas read it at dawn. A rare smile broke through the exhaustion. For the first time, it wasn't him saving her. It was her saving both of them. He folded the paper carefully, placed it in his pocket, and whispered to the empty room. Now London will learn what real courage looks like. At the same hour, in her mansion draped in bitterness, Lady Blackwater read the same article. Her expression darkened. She tore the paper clean in half. You think love will outlast power? We shall see. She turned toward her mirror, her reflection sharp as ice. If they want war, I'll bring them winter. The day after Louise's letter to the press, London's gossip changed its tone. No longer a story of sin, but of defiance. Every salon debated her courage. Every gentleman discussed the Duke's loyalty. But something darker began to stir. Power never forgives rebellion, and Lady Blackwater had friends in high places. In a marble office near Westminster, a meeting took place behind closed doors. 3 men of wealth and influence, each older than reason, sat in polished chairs that had outlasted kings. On the desk lay a document sealed with crimson ribbon, the Duke of Rainsford's inheritance charter. Lady Blackwater stood before them, veiled in black lace, her smile sharper than her grief. My lords, she began softly, we all respect the Duke's position, but surely you see the danger in allowing his scandal to represent the crown. Lord Wentworth adjusted his spectacles. You suggest removal? Not removal, she said sweetly. Correction. The Rainsford title was granted conditionally generations ago. Should the Duke disgrace the family name, the estate reverts to the crown. Lord Pembroke frowned. Disgrace is a vague word, my lady. She leaned forward, voice dripping with poison. A duel, a public scandal, a widow. Surely we have enough to redefine it. By evening, the rumor had reached Thomas's own halls. Whitby burst into the Duke's study, pale and breathless. Your Grace, there's talk of a petition. The peers intend to review your title. Revocation. Thomas's pen stopped mid-sentence. He looked up slowly. On what grounds? Moral impropriety. Lady Blackwater's hand is all over it. Thomas leaned back in his chair. For a moment he said nothing. Then quietly, of course it is. Whitby lowered his voice. They intend to make you choose, your honor or your name. Louise found out that same night. A messenger brought the letter, unsigned but unmistakably royal. She read it once. Then again. Her hand trembled. If the Duke of Rainsford continues his public association with Lady Ellingham, his title and holdings may be forfeited under the law of inheritance. Eliza gasped. They can't mean it, Louise whispered. They mean every word. She folded the letter carefully. The edges cut her fingertips. Sometimes love feels like that, she thought, beautiful, and sharp enough to bleed. The following morning she went to Rainsford Hall unannounced. Servants bowed awkwardly. The staff already knew. When she entered his study, Thomas was standing by the window, coat unbuttoned, letters scattered like fallen soldiers across the floor. You've heard, she said. He nodded. It's true, then. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Louise approached slowly. So they'll take everything, if you keep me. He smiled faintly. They can take the bricks. They won't take me. Her heart ached at his calmness. Thomas, he interrupted. Do you think I built all this to protect marble and silver? I built it for the freedom to choose. And I choose you. Louise shook her head. Don't romanticize ruin. You'll lose everything that defines you. He turned, meeting her gaze. Then perhaps it's time to find out what defines me without it. She wanted to argue, but tears betrayed her. You can't fight the crown. He stepped closer. No, but I can refuse to kneel. He took her hand, held it tightly. If they strip me of my title, so be it. I was a man before I was a duke, Louise whispered. And I was invisible before you saw me. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. Then let's be seen together. Whatever comes next. By afternoon, London's Parliament received the petition. By evening, it was public knowledge. A special hearing would be held in 7 days. The Duke of Rainsford's title and fortune were under review. Lady Blackwater celebrated quietly, wine in hand. Her reflection in the glass smiled back. Love may have survived gossip, she murmured, but it won't survive law. Over the next week, Thomas prepared for the inevitable. He dismissed his advisors, sold part of his holdings to pay his servants in advance. When Whitby protested, he simply said, "If I fall, they won't fall with me." Louise stayed by his side through it all. Each day brought another rumor, another headline, another reason to give up. But she didn't. At night, they sat by the fire, speaking little. Sometimes silence was kinder than words. One evening, as snow fell against the windows, she asked quietly, "What if they strip everything? What will you do then?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Marry you anyway." Her breath caught. "Thomas, you can't," he smiled. "Can't? I've already asked you in every way except words." He took her hand, pressed it to his lips. "So let me ask properly now. Louise Ellingham, will you be my ruin, my redemption, and my home?" Tears slipped down her face. She nodded, unable to speak. He pulled her close, whispering against her hair. "Then whatever they take, we still win." That same night, a messenger arrived at Lady Blackwater's door. A single note, no seal, no signature. She opened it and froze. "The Queen requests your presence at the hearing." Her fingers tightened around the paper. Her smile vanished. The game she'd started had caught the attention of someone far more dangerous than love. In the city's heart, bells tolled midnight. Louise stood by the window, watching snow fall over the rooftops. Her reflection looked different now. No longer the rejected widow, no longer afraid. Behind her, Thomas wrapped an arm around her waist. The world was about to change. Titles could vanish. Fortunes could fade. But love, once named, was difficult to undo. She whispered, "They'll try to destroy you." He kissed her temple softly. "Then let them try. You can't destroy what no longer hides." Snow fell over Westminster like a shroud. The city seemed to hold its breath. Inside the Parliament Hall, the air was heavy with perfume, whispers, and politics. The benches were filled with lords, bishops, and peers of the realm, men who measured morality in gold and reputation. At the far end, elevated above them all, sat Queen Adelaide, regal, calm, unforgiving. At her left stood the Duke of Rainsford. At her right, Lady Louise Ellingham. Between them, Silence and Lady Blackwater, draped in black silk like vengeance itself. The clerk's voice echoed through the chamber. "The matter before Her Majesty concerns the alleged dishonor of His Grace, Thomas Hale, Duke of Rainsford, and his association with the widow, Lady Ellingham. The Crown reserves the right to revoke all titles should moral breach or corruption be proven." Every word sounded like a blade. Thomas stood tall, his posture impeccable. Louise's hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles pale. Across the room, Lady Blackwater smiled faintly, confident that ruin had perfect timing. The Queen's voice cut through the murmur. "Let us begin." The first witness was Lord Pembroke. He bowed and began with the measured tone of a man who enjoyed the sound of his own voice. "Your Majesty, the Duke's conduct has invited scandal upon the Crown. He fought a duel, took in a widow, defied the ton, and challenged tradition. If we do not punish such recklessness, we erode our very order." The Queen's eyes shifted toward Thomas. "Do you deny these actions, Duke?" He met her gaze without fear. "No, Your Majesty. I deny only that they were reckless. They were choices of conscience." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Lady Blackwater raised a fan to her lips, pretending not to smirk. "And the duel?" she called out sweetly. "Was that conscience as well, or passion?" Thomas turned toward her slowly. "Both. The man I shot murdered her husband." Silence fell again. Even the lords stopped breathing. Lady Blackwater blinked, but her smile quickly returned. How convenient. Yet the law requires proof, not sentiment. Thomas's jaw tightened. "I have both." He gestured to Whitby, who stepped forward carrying a sealed envelope. Inside was a signed confession, Harland Ellingham's final letter found in his estate, detailing his crimes and Lady Blackwater's involvement. Whitby placed it before the Queen. "Your Majesty, these are his words. His handwriting, his seal." The Queen read silently for a moment. Her expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. When she spoke again, her voice carried weight enough to silence generations. Lady Blackwater stepped forward. The woman obeyed, though her smile faltered. "You have accused the Duke of corruption and deceit. Yet this document names you as an accomplice to forgery and extortion." How do you answer? Lady Blackwater hesitated. Your Majesty, I enough. The Queen rose. When a woman uses grief to wound the innocent, she becomes the scandal she craves. Guards escort Lady Blackwater from this hall. Gasps erupted as she was led away, her fan dropping to the floor like a fallen crown. The Queen returned to her seat. The chamber trembled under the weight of relief and fear. Then she looked to Louise. Lady Ellingham stepped forward. Louise did, her heart pounding in her chest. Your Majesty. The Queen regarded her for a long moment. London loves to judge women who refuse to fade. You could have hidden. You chose to stand. Tell me why. Louise took a breath, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Because I spent half my life being quiet. Silence didn't protect me. Truth did. And love. The Queen's gaze softened. Love, you say? Do you love this man? Louise's eyes turned to Thomas. The room dissolved around them. Yes, Your Majesty, with what remains of my heart. The Queen turned to Thomas. And you, Duke? He bowed his head slightly. With what remains of my soul. For a heartbeat, the great hall was still. Then the Queen spoke again, her voice like winter giving way to spring. Then let it be known. Titles may be inherited, but honor must be earned. The Duke of Rainsford shall keep his name, and Lady Ellingham shall keep his heart. Applause broke out, not the polite kind, but the real kind. Rare in politics. Almost holy. Outside, the bells of St. Paul's began to ring. Louise stepped into the pale afternoon light, her breath visible in the cold. Thomas joined her, his hand finding hers naturally. It's over, she whispered. He smiled faintly. No, it's just beginning. She laughed softly, tears still clinging to her lashes. And what do we do with a beginning? He leaned close. We live it. Back inside, the Queen watched from the balcony as they left. A lady beside her murmured, Your Majesty, you've created quite the scandalous love story. The Queen smiled. Then it's the only kind worth telling. That evening, the city celebrated. Not officially, of course. London pretended to dislike romance, but devoured it greedily when no one was watching. Candles burned brighter. Music filled the streets. Somewhere in the heart of Rainsford Hall, laughter returned. Louise stood by the fire as Thomas approached. He slipped a small velvet box into her hand. You once told me you didn't need promises. Now I give you one anyway. Inside lay a simple gold ring, shaped like two entwined lilies. She smiled through her tears, then consider it kept. He kissed her, slow and certain as snow began to fall again outside. London could whisper all it liked. Some stories didn't need permission. Winter had surrendered to a softer light. The city still whispered their names, but now it did so with something like awe. The Duke and the widow. The scandal that became devotion. Louise had grown used to stares that no longer stung. Markets greeted her with cautious respect. Children curtsied in curiosity. Even the carriages slowed when she crossed the square. In the quiet warmth of Rainsford Hall, peace had found them at last. Or so it seemed. One afternoon, while Louise was arranging fresh lilies in the drawing room, Thomas entered holding a sealed letter. His expression gave her pause. Another invitation? She teased lightly. Unless the Crown is hosting a dance, I'm not going. He didn't smile. Not this time. It's from the Prime Minister. Louise turned slowly. That doesn't sound like a social visit. He handed her the letter. Her eyes scanned the first lines and her heart sank. Your Grace, in recognition of your service, courage, and unyielding loyalty to the realm, the Crown extends an offer of renewed position within the Privy Council, a voice in Parliament, a seat among those who shape the future of England. Louise looked up. Thomas, this is power. He nodded, and a leash. That evening, the subject returned. Thomas sat before the fire, silent, the letter unopened beside him. Louise watched from the window, her voice gentle. You've always wanted influence, Thomas, to use your name for more than profit. He met her gaze. I wanted to build something no one could take. But the moment I accept their offer, I'm theirs again. She approached, sitting across from him. You don't trust them. I don't trust myself with them. His tone was low, thoughtful. Power has a way of convincing a man he can fix the world, until he forgets the people he was trying to protect. Louise reached out, touching his hand. Then don't fix the world. Just keep ours safe. He smiled faintly, but she could see the war behind his eyes. Duty had always been his second heartbeat. The next morning, a messenger arrived from Westminster. An official visit. 3 men in crisp black coats bearing the Crown's insignia. They were polite. Too polite. Your Grace, one of them said smoothly. Her Majesty insists upon your answer by week's end. The realm has few men of your honor. We would see it put to use. Thomas's reply was measured. Honor doesn't vanish when a man declines a throne. The messenger smiled thinly. Nor does it grow when he hides from one. When they left, the silence in the hall was unbearable. Louise stepped beside him. They won't let you refuse easily. He nodded. Power never accepts silence as an answer. Days passed. Letters arrived. Visitors came. The pressure mounted like London fog. Louise watched the change in him. The return of sleepless nights. The restlessness of a man torn between peace and legacy. Finally, one evening, she found him in the library staring at the portrait of his late father. He looked older, not in years, but in weight. What would he do? She asked softly. Thomas didn't turn. He'd take it, and lose himself by inches. Louise stepped closer. Then maybe your legacy isn't what you do for England. Maybe it's what you refuse to let England do to you. He smiled faintly at that. You always know the right words. No, she said quietly. I just remind you of what you already know. That same night, while the city slept, a carriage stopped before Rainsford Hall. A messenger descended, bearing a second letter. The Queen's own seal. Louise read it before Thomas did. Her Majesty writes that she understands your hesitation, but she also writes this. She handed him the letter. His eyes scanned the final lines. The realm does not need your power, Thomas. It needs your integrity, and integrity only shines when it stands beside love. He folded the letter slowly. She trusts us to decide wisely. Louise smiled. Then perhaps wisdom is overrated. He laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension. You think I should decline. I think you already have. He reached for her hand. And what if I regret it one day? She met his gaze. Then regret it with me. By morning, his decision was made. The messenger returned. Thomas handed him a sealed reply. Tell Her Majesty I am honored. But my service to the realm is fulfilled. I intend to serve elsewhere. The man frowned. Elsewhere? Thomas looked toward Louise, who stood at the staircase, radiant in morning light. Here. That afternoon, the bells of St. Paul's rang again. The news spread quickly. The Duke had turned down Parliament. The widow had turned down fear. And together they had chosen something stronger than both, freedom. London was stunned. Power had been offered and refused. For love, for peace, for something that could not be bought. That night, Thomas and Louise dined alone, laughter echoing against the high ceilings that no longer felt like walls. You've given up everything, she teased. He smiled, everything that didn't matter. She poured the wine, leaning close. And what will you do now, Duke, without a committee? He grinned. Build a garden. Raise chaos. Love you until London grows bored of talking about it. Louise laughed softly. Then we'll have eternity. Outside, the city lights shimmered like tiny crowns across the horizon. Some stories began with scandal. Others ended in peace. But theirs had become a quiet rebellion against everything London believed it understood about love. The city was wrapped once again in white. Snow covered the cobblestones like lace. And for the first time in many seasons, London whispered not in mockery but in anticipation. The Duke and the widow were to be married. No ballrooms, no trumpets, no grand announcement. Just a quiet ceremony in St. Luke's Chapel, attended by a few who had stayed when others fled. Louise insisted on simplicity. No diamonds, no titles, only truth. Eliza fussed over her dress that morning, a gown of ivory silk trimmed with soft gold embroidery. No veil. Louise said she had nothing left to hide. When Eliza fastened the last button, she stepped back with teary eyes. You look like forgiveness, my lady. Louise smiled faintly. Forgiveness feels heavier than it looks. Across town, Thomas dressed in silence. His valet offered him the family signet ring, the one every Duke of Rainsford had worn. He closed the box gently. Not today. Today I marry as a man, not a title. Outside, the carriage waited under soft snowfall. As he climbed in, he thought of everything London had taken from them, and everything it had given back. Scandal had burned his name. Love had rebuilt his soul. The chapel was small, quiet, and warm. Candles flickered along the pews. The scent of winter roses filled the air. Louise entered alone. No father, no escort, just courage. Every step toward him felt like an answer to a prayer she had once been too afraid to make. Thomas stood at the altar, eyes steady, heart unguarded. When she reached him, the world seemed to pause. The priest spoke softly. His words carried through the air like music of vows, of mercy, of second chances. Thomas took her hands. "Louise Ellingham," he said quietly, "I have lived through pride, loss, and rumor, but none of it ever truly touched me until you did. You saw the man beneath the title, and you stayed." Her eyes shimmered. "Thomas Hale, you taught me that love is not the opposite of fear. It's what survives after it. You gave me a home not of walls, but of belonging." The priest nodded. "Do you promise to honor one another in all seasons, light and shadow alike?" They answered together. "We do." When he kissed her, it wasn't scandal, it was salvation. Applause broke softly through the stillness. Not loud, just enough to feel like hope. After the ceremony, they walked through the garden behind the chapel. Snowflakes fell on her hair, melting into the silk. He brushed one away gently. "You are far too beautiful for this world." Louise smiled. "Then it's a good thing I married someone reckless enough to keep me here." They laughed together, quiet and genuine. No music, no audience, just peace. Later, at Rainsford Hall, close friends gathered for a small supper. Lady Montclair raised her glass to the couple who made London believe in miracles again. Eliza wiped her eyes in the corner. Even Whitby managed to smile. For once no one whispered. Even the gossip pages printed only 3 words the next morning: "Love wins winter." But not everyone celebrated. Far from the city, in a dim inn on the outskirts of Surrey, a carriage stopped. A cloaked figure stepped out, the air thick with frost. Inside the carriage, a hand clutched a newspaper. Its ink smeared, but legible lowered the paper slowly. A woman's voice brittle as ice. "So he thinks it's over." She turned toward the man waiting in the shadows. He bowed slightly. "My lady, London believes you dead. Let it believe what it likes," she replied. "I'm very good at haunting." When she lowered her hood, the candlelight revealed a familiar face. Lady Blackwater, paler, colder, alive, her lips curved. If love can rise from ashes, then so can revenge. Back in London, Thomas and Louise sat by the fire. He poured wine, the kind she loved. The ring on her finger caught the light, a circle of gold lilies. She rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder," she whispered, "if our story will end quietly?" He smiled. Quiet never suited us. The fire crackled, warm and safe. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft, endless, and unaware that another storm was already forming beyond the city walls. The snow had melted into silver puddles. London smelled of damp cobblestones, early flowers, and gossip reborn. Because in London, peace was never permanent. It was merely a pause between scandals. At Rainsford Hall, Louise arranged tulips by the window, her laughter echoing through the parlor. Thomas had been away that morning, inspecting one of his estates. The house felt alive again, filled with warmth, piano music, and the quiet rhythm of a marriage that had survived fire. But outside, someone watched. A carriage lingered near the gate. Its passenger observed through a half-drawn curtain, her gloved hand resting on the window's edge. Lady Blackwater had returned. She had changed. Her beauty was colder now, her voice low and deliberate. London believed her exiled. But vengeance, as she liked to say, always traveled under a false name. She was no longer Lady Blackwater. Her new title, Countess Ravenhall, was printed neatly on visiting cards sent to every drawing room in Mayfair. Within a week, every hostess in London was whispering about the mysterious countess who had survived ruin abroad and returned richer than before. And soon enough the whispers reached Louise. At tea, Lady Montclair leaned close. "My dear, there's a new woman in town. Ravenhall, I believe. She speaks French like honey and dresses like sin. Even the Queen has invited her to the charity ball next month." Louise smiled politely. Then she felt the chill creep up her spine. Ravenhall, a name that sounded like a memory wearing perfume. That evening, Thomas returned. Louise met him at the door. "Do you know anyone by the name Ravenhall?" He froze slightly before answering. "Why?" "Because she's everywhere suddenly. Every lady talks about her as if she were royalty." Thomas hesitated. Then his voice dropped. "Louise Ravenhall is Blackwater." Her breath caught. "That's impossible." "She was exiled." He nodded grimly. "Exile is just another word for delay." Weeks passed. London prepared for the grand charity ball at Kensington Palace. The ton would attend, dressed in their finest hypocrisy. Louise tried to ignore the feeling of unease. But one cannot ignore a storm once it chooses your house. The invitation arrived. Her Majesty requests the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Rainsford. Yes, Duchess. London had finally accepted her title, though not everyone was pleased about it. Thomas studied the letter. We can refuse. Louise shook her head. No, we go. If we keep running, she wins. The ballroom that night glittered like a jeweled secret. Candelabras dripped gold light across the marble floors. The orchestra played a waltz designed to disguise tension. When Thomas and Louise entered, conversation stilled for just a moment, admiration and envy sharing the same breath. But at the far end of the hall, the crowd parted as another figure arrived. The Countess Ravenhall. She wore black silk trimmed with silver lace like a morning star. Her hair gleamed under the chandeliers, her smile too perfect to be human. Louise's pulse quickened. So it was true. Their eyes met across the ballroom, one full of grace, the other of poison. Ravenhall approached with exquisite poise. Your Grace, it's been too long. Louise inclined her head slightly. Not long enough, I fear. The Countess laughed softly, her tone sugar-wrapped around venom. Oh, how London loves a happy ending. But endings are such unreliable things, don't you think? Thomas stepped forward, his gaze sharp. I thought exile had cured your taste for theatrics. Ravenhall's smile didn't falter. On the contrary, exile teaches clarity and patience. She leaned closer, her voice low. Enjoy your peace, Your Grace, it never lasts. Then she turned and glided away, her perfume lingering like a curse. Later that evening, as they danced beneath the chandeliers, Louise whispered, She wants revenge. Thomas nodded. Then she'll find none here. But he was wrong. Revenge always finds its own way in. Days later, rumors began to spread. False letters. Forged debts, servants questioned. Suddenly, whispers claimed the Duke had funded illicit trade. The same kind of scandal that once destroyed Louise's late husband. Thomas burned every letter, furious but calm. She wants us angry, he told her. She wants us afraid. Louise's eyes glistened. Then we won't give her either. One night, Louise found a letter on her vanity, sealed in black wax. Inside was only one sentence. Meet me in the garden where he died. Her heart stopped. She knew the place, the rose garden of the old Ellingham estate, long abandoned. Thomas forbade her to go. But Louise had lived too long letting others fight her battles. At dawn she left quietly, her cloak pulled tight. The garden was wild now. Thorns everywhere. The fountain cracked and dry. And there, beneath the dead roses, stood Ravenhall. You shouldn't have come alone, she said. Louise met her gaze. I'm not afraid of ghosts. Ravenhall smiled faintly. You should be. Because you and I are made of the same thing, loss. The only difference is that you forgave yours. Louise's voice was steady. And you never did. For a moment the Countess faltered. Then she laughed bitterly. You took everything that was meant for me. His love, his redemption, his story. Louise shook her head. No, I just stopped letting pain be my language. Ravenhall's expression cracked, just enough for truth to show. Her hand trembled. For the briefest instant she looked human again. Then Thomas's voice echoed from behind the hedges. Enough. Guards appeared from the shadows. Ravenhall's plan had failed. She was escorted away without resistance, her face unreadable. As they let her out, she looked back one last time. You think love saves you, Louise. But love is just the prettiest kind of war. Louise's eyes filled with tears. Then let it be the war we win. Months later, spring bloomed fully. The gossip faded. Peace returned, not perfect but earned. Louise walked through the new rose garden Thomas had planted at Rainsford Hall. Red, white, and gold blossoms intertwined. She touched a petal gently. Thomas joined her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She's gone, he said quietly. Louise nodded. So is the part of me that feared her. He smiled. Then we are both free. That night they stood by the fire. Louise rested her head on his chest. We've survived scandal, loss, and ghosts. What do we do now? Thomas kissed her hair. We live quietly, and let the world gossip about love for once. She laughed softly. That might be the greatest scandal of all. Outside, the first roses of spring opened under moonlight. Not perfect, not eternal, but alive. And in London, that was miracle enough. Love is rarely polite. It bruises. It humbles. But it heals. And in a world obsessed with titles and appearances, there will always be those who dare to choose the scandal of kindness. If this story touched your heart, remember, redemption is never out of season. Subscribe, share, and stay for the next tale of courage, folly, and the endless dance of love.